Okay, today we thought we would discuss Carney's options for Ukraine aid. The biggest issue I have is how can Canada best act to help Ukraine? Carney flew over there after being uninvited to meet with Donald Trump with the other world leaders of Europe to discuss the Ukraine peace process. That led Carney to having to fly over and meet directly with Zelensky to discuss Canada's participation. On that note, I would like to discuss what are Canada's options and why Canada should be involved in a significant role in Ukraine. The population is what of Ukraine descendants in Canada, Cal?
There's apparently over 1.2 million people that consider themselves partially Ukrainian or of Ukrainian descent. But one of the things that you have to remember here is the Ukrainians have been immigrating to Canada since prior to the First World War, in between the wars, and subsequent to the Second World War. So they're mostly, I would say, Canadians that consider themselves partially Ukrainians. I understand you share that lineage.
Yes, and I don't, on the census, I never wrote in any census that I am identify as Ukraine because I'm Canadian. So there are probably a lot more people that do have Ukraine heritage and history in their family trees. In Alberta, I believe there's 300 and some thousand Canadians that identify as Ukraine heritage. That's quite significant. The reason I bring it up is because we are the second largest Ukraine population outside of Ukraine. Russia has more than Canada. And Alberta is the most populated Ukraine population in all of Canada. That means that there are lots of ties to families, relatives, and industry over in Ukraine, and the desire to see this illegal invasion stopped. The reason that it needs to be dealt with on a different level is because Ukraine gave up its nuclear armament in the promise of protection and peace from both Russia and the US. And what it appears now is that both Russia and the US are trying to divvy up the spoils of war in Ukraine. And the US is doing it in a devious manner, in my opinion, because even though Biden was president, Trump controlled the House and the Senate. And they imposed roadblocks to the defense of Ukraine. And I do believe it's because Ukraine, under Zelensky, would not produce slander on Hunter Biden when asked by Trump, and Trump lost the second bid for presidency. And we know that Trump has retaliatory measures in place to anybody that wronged him. And in so doing, he has implemented a payback strategy that includes, foremost, that Ukraine loses people and the ability to defend itself. And those are blatant in his actions. But on top of that, we had an ex-KGB officer state a few weeks ago emphatically that he knows that Putin has videotapes of Trump with underage girls in Russia. And if we extrapolate, there needs to be a link found that money from Epstein was also going to Russia. And that link needs to be explained in the Epstein files. And until then, we know that the actions seem dubious of the US in the actual aid and defense of Ukraine. And we see that from Trump demanding giving up mineral rights for aid that was already donated to Ukraine. And then immediately now, Trump is not giving any aid to Ukraine, even though they agreed to sign over their mineral rights, and has demanded that everything be paid for by European countries buying the military supplies and supplying them if and when Trump releases them to be delivered. So we're going to see delays in delivery and restrictions on how to use them because they do not want the arms to give an advantage to Ukraine to defend themselves to push for a peace agreement. And that is my take on what's going on. You have a little slightly different take, I'm sure. What's your position?
Well, I don't really think there's enough time in our lifetimes to go through the circumstances that we find ourselves in today. However, the point is, Canada has recently given the Ukrainian president assurances that we are going to give him $2 billion in military assistance, as well as not rule out the fact that we would put Canadian troops on the ground. Now, I can't find very much on what the particulars of that would be, but I think there's some real fundamental problems with that concept. And starting with the fact that how many troops is Canada going to put in there? What would their duties be? Where would they be located? What would their mandate be? What happens in the event that a war breaks out? And why would you do that? And so I would like your take on that one, Corey.
Well, there was a peace agreement with Russia after taking over the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass, etc. And they had a peace agreement that was broken by Russia and continually broken along the front lines with attacks by Russia. Canada provided a few hundred military trainees to train the Ukraine army in modern techniques and the use of Western equipment. When Trump lost the election, Trump keeps referring to the fact that I could have stopped the invasion, which means we all know he was still in contact with Putin. And Putin moved a big army on the border of Ukraine thinking he could take over the government of Ukraine in 3 days. And I would like to know how many conversations were made between Putin and Trump, because Trump always has partial truth to his statements. And I do believe Putin would ask, what is the Senate and the House going to do? Because it's controlled by Trump. And Trump is an authoritarian top-down management person. So Putin would have had the discussions with him. Would the Senate allow U.S. to obligate the defense of Ukraine? And I'm pretty sure Trump would have said, we're going to block it at all costs, because if Trump has the ability to stop the Senate from voting in favor of anything Biden passes, he can put a restriction on the aid to Ukraine. And Putin, if Putin has documents that incriminate Trump, Trump will do whatever he says. So I think that might have been one of the underlying reasons that Russia actually tried to take out the Ukraine government, which Zelensky had just been elected into as president. The revolution to have ties broke with Russia was done a few years prior to that, which was the reason for the invasion to Crimea, which was on the books and planned for many decades, most likely under Putin. And timing was everything, right after the Sochi Olympics, to make sure that world opinion of Russia was at a peak, and they could say, well, we took it over and there was no opposition by Ukraine, so it's ours. And that is what facilitates further expansion of the war. When nobody intervenes, war expands. And the issue of war with Russia, Russia has a history of many confrontations. And under Putin, he went into Georgia and tried to do the same thing that he's doing in Ukraine. There was the Chechen Wars, which Russia tried to do the same thing as Ukraine. And if you recall, Belarus claimed to have a fixed election, and they got their current president as a result. So the sphere of influence is a whatever country is under Putin does exactly what Putin says, or you fly through windows on the fourth story or fifth story, or something happens to you that you die mysteriously. Trump has some sort of involvement because he claims that he could have stopped the war in one day, and if I'd have been president, there would have been no war. And he stated that, which leads to the conclusion that I believe that him and Putin had discussed the invasion prior to the invasion. And then if we look at it, say there is some truth to that, then that is the reason that there's limitations on the ability to defend in Ukraine. They restricted weapons, they restricted delivery of weapons, they restricted this, and they forced the European countries to restrict it as well, coming from US lead. Canada is in a unique position because of our deep Ukraine ties, and that puts a different onus on Canada. In my opinion, Carney should forget the peace process. The peace process with Putin is been laid out by Putin. Capitulation, and you'll do as we say, and we'll provide the peace monitors, and Ukraine will give up everything, and there's no negotiations involved. Trump seems to agree with them. Give up land, give up this, give up that, and there's no concessions for real peace. Russia has a history of breaking all peace agreements with Ukraine, and there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't.
So if I can just take you back to your first statement here, you can't trust the Russians because they've invaded numerous countries in the past. Okay, so I just did a quick search over the last few years because I think that's a valid point. You know, if you're looking at whether or not you can trust your partners. The U.S., for example, 1965, Indonesia, Brazil, Philippines, Angola, Guyana, Chile, Ecuador, Cambodia, Puerto Rico, Guam, Mexico, Japan, Vietnam, Germany, France, Italy, Algeria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Canada, Syria. Now in Canada, they're talking about a naval incident. So I mean, this is everything from terrorist suppression through to actual bombing and invasions. Laos, Libya, Paraguay, Bulgaria, Serbia, Lebanon, Ireland, blah blah blah. So I think
the U.S. is no angel.
Okay, so what you're asking the Russians to do is to, I gather, trust the Americans.
Well, it's not a matter of trust the Americans. It's you have two levels of government. One is fascism and authoritarianism, and one is trying to be democratic where the people have the say. Now, we know for a fact now that the U.S. is not a democratic country, and it looks very totalitarianism and fascist. So we as a Canada cannot trust the U.S., nor can we trust Russia. So what you're stating is a fact. Now, Russia has a history of, in 1939, invaded Poland. In 1939, it invaded Finland.
Okay, Corey.
Russia invaded Lithuania. These are countries under the Russian regime.
Okay,
Just let me continue. In 56,
Corey, we're talking about Canadian. We're talking about Canadian peacekeepers.
No, you talked about U.S. I'm talking about Russia's invading of Russian satellite states. Now, in 1940, Russia invades Lithuania. In 1956, Russia invades Hungary. 1968, Russia invades Czechoslovakia. 1979, Russia invades Afghanistan. 1994, Russia invades Chechnya. 1999, Russia invades Chechnya again. 2008, Russia invades Georgia. 2014, Russia invades Crimea. 2015, Russia invades Syria. And 2022, Russia invades Ukraine again. So we can both agree that the U.S. is not trustworthy and that Russia is not trustworthy, and they're both claimed to be the superpowers along with China. But when a country gives up its nuclear armament in a agreed protection status by US and Russia, and one of the parties invades the other, shouldn't the US have stood up against Russia as part of that agreement? And what it sends as a message to the rest of the world: you at best have your own nuclear weapons, and if you have them, never give them up, or you face what Ukraine faces. And that's a very wrong message to send the world, is that you can't trust the US or Russia in any agreements, or the democratic countries of the world aren't going to stand behind you because the US will oppose them. And that's the problem. Now, Canada has been threatened to be invaded by the US or taken over by the US. We have a large Ukraine population, and the war continues with restrictions imposed by a fascist regime in USA. The fact that he's manipulating media and lying and cheating and cutting deals to line the pockets of the US and ultimately the pockets of him and his families and friends leads to having an understanding that this war is going to be ongoing because it's so lucrative for Russia. Russia now has factories in operation that it had high unemployment before the war, and the war economy is working well, except for now oil refineries are being blown up, affecting the cash flow. But there's no real restrictions put on in sanctions by the US against Russia, and India and China accept their oil. So it's not hurting the finances, it's actually helping the finances of Russia through employment. The same with the US. It's creating jobs in the US to keep the war going. And that's my point, is that this is a monetary position that both Putin and Trump financially benefit from. Now, as Carney must know, there's over 1 million people, probably a couple million related Ukraine descent in Canada. And why isn't there being discussions of no-fly zones over Ukraine? Because the only flying over with Shahed drones and missiles is to bomb and target civilians. Those civilians need protecting in Europe. And it's only a matter of time before one of those Shahed drones or a missile goes astray and hits Poland and kills people, or hits Moldova and kills people. It's just a matter of time. So why isn't the fly zone put in place? Well, Trump vetoed that a long time ago with his Senate under Biden. They don't want a no-fly zone. Europe should be demanding a no-fly zone and enforcing a no-fly zone, because planes and missiles are going over international zones to target Ukraine. And vice versa. If it's no-fly zone, Ukraine would have to be no-fly as well. Except maybe on the front lines where they can use drones to force a peace movement. Now,
Okay, can we get back to whether or not Canada should put peacekeepers?
A bully will not yield to something that they are in total control of. And that's the problem in Ukraine. Russia is in total control of everything, and they don't have to yield. There's going to be no peace unless there is a strong opposition. And right now, that is not at a peak performance. So now you can go back to.
Well, I think we're in agreement. I think we're in absolute agreement. Canada should not send peace troop keepers over there because there's no peace.
There's no peace. What we need to send is a peace contingent to defend the borders of non-conflict areas like Belarus, Poland, and other border areas. And what that does is it sends a message to Putin that, look, we're not engaging in war, but we know that we have to start the peace process somewhere. And if we have peacekeepers on the ground in the country 600 miles or more from the front lines, there's no reason for you to target them. They're not targeting you. But if you target them, they'll shoot down whatever missiles or drones that are incoming. And it's a peacekeeping troop over there in advance of a peacekeeping mission or peace negotiations. And if you don't do a preemptive peacekeeping mission over there, Russia has no reason to believe that the U.S. won't prevent countries from actually causing a peace agreement and putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. And I don't think you'd have a hard time finding people in the military of Canada that have Ukraine background and history that would be willing to go over there and act as peacekeepers along the Belarus border and keeping the peace. That should be done. And that's one of the steps I would have done if I was in Carney's boots. And France, 6 months, a year ago, Macron stated that he was willing to put troops in there if Russia was bringing in North Korean troops and Chinese troops. There's already multiple countries aiding and abetting Russia to invading a single country with a single army. And I think that's where the oppressive nature of the U.S. influence has stopped Macron from putting French troops in the ground as peacekeepers or on the front lines. And I think that's a strong defense will always push for peace, because without that, we're just going to be in a cycle of continual war for 2 to 3 years till Ukraine manufactures enough of its long-range missiles and actually starts hurting Russian economy. Right now, the Russian economy has never been so good. It's better now than before 2014. And that's one of the motives for continuance of the war. Money. Even though sanctions cost it, it's making the economy strong in Russia.
Let's talk about money. Canada's Carney says he's going to give $2 billion to the Ukrainians, most of which will be used to buy U.S. military equipment to hand over to the Ukrainians. So Canada is going to give money to Trump so that Trump's military industrial machine can profit by sending the equipment to the Ukraine.
That's the Trump extortion method. He's extorting countries to line the pockets of him and his buddies in the U.S. And that has to occur because we allowed it to occur over the last 50 years. So we have to break those strings, and we should be building our own refineries for building equipment, and Europe is looking at that. So
the latest
transition of appeasing the criminal felon running the U.S. right now.
Well, the latest is Trump says that they're considering the U.S. government buying into the arms industry because they're the only ones really supporting it. So he's going to make it a profit center, and of course, for the American government. And the joke is that the price per shares went up in defense industry contractors because now the U.S. government is going to actually give them cash to buy equity,
right?
Not only cash to buy military supplies. And the Europeans are going to give them cash to buy military supplies. Yeah. Apparently, the Canadians are going to give them cash to buy military supplies. When does that foolishness end?
It's not going to. It's the extortion of Trump with tariff sanctions and lining his pockets. It's the biggest scam on the international scale right now. And that's the problem, is there's so much money to be made by causing the war to continue for 5 or 10 years when these two old leaders, Putin and Trump, will be in ill health in 5-10 years, and they don't really give a crap. It's line their pockets now, get their families rich, and let the cards fall wherever they may in the future. Right now, they're on top of the world, and they have everything they require. Their economies are thriving. They're laughing and joking. Meeting in Alaska couldn't be better. Trump isn't getting exposed for involvement in the Epstein files or his sexual, being a sexual pervert or anything. Like, it's total bullshit that's going on, and the world has to wake up. The only way you're going to be able to deal with it is actually getting involved, sitting on the sideline, being the cheering squad and clapping your hands and handing money to Trump to, oh, please help Ukraine. No, you got to put boots on the ground over in Ukraine in advance of the peace agreement and tell Putin, look, we're preparing for the peace. We're moving our troops into peaceful areas that are away from conflict zones, and that could pressure Russia into having to at least stop the war and negotiate. Because if an errant missile takes out foreign troops, it is full-out war because those foreign troops are going to go to the front line. And that's one tactic that you can use against a bully and a rogue state. And the rogue state is working in hand with the other rogue state called the U.S. So,
Corey, how many troops are we going to send over there?
Well, we can send what we can
20,
send. I mean, there's only
30.
a few thousand that can, but once Canada does it, France will follow suit, England will follow suit, and that's the thing. Somebody has to be the country to lead the we can't sit by and not act. I mean, you look at World War II, countries sat and didn't act. And as a result, Germany expanded its war and expanded its war. U.S., prime example, it never got involved until bombing of Pearl Harbor. And as a result, Germany took over a lot of countries that it probably wouldn't have if U.S. had moved its troops in and got involved. Instead, they were turning away refugees. Jews were turned away by Canada that were trying to seek and escape Germany and Nazism. And that is a black mark on Canada. But we should learn from history that you can't avoid the big bullies around the world. And you need to take a stand or you lose democracy and you get fascism like what's happening in the U.S. right now and in Putin's Russia. Fascism rules. If you do not take a stand, fascism rules. And that we can't allow. And if there's going to be a third world war, there's going to be a third world war whether we get involved in Ukraine or not involved in Ukraine. Because North Korea, China are already seeing that nobody wants to oppose them getting involved with Russia. So it's given a green light for other countries to rally around and join together to cause wars in other areas of the world. And that's something we've got to be aware of, is this could show to these powerhouses that they can go into any country they want and the free world will not oppose them because Trump under fascism will just sit there and say, well, you can pay me. I might deliver the goods 6 months to a year or 3 years from now, but you're paying me for the weapons and we're lining our pockets and at your expense. And we're going to put restrictions on the use of the weapons so you can't really use them effectively to defend yourself. This causes a problem worldwide and will be the cause of World War III. And it is better to take proactive measures to stop it than to sit and have saying, oh shit, we should have done something earlier and we might not be in World War III.
So you're saying escalate?
No, I'm saying send in peacekeepers saying we're not waiting for you to sign the peace deal. We're insisting the peace deal goes down now. We're putting the peacekeepers at the borders of neutral countries and saying, now we're prepared for the peace process.
Well, Canada's put troops in Estonia.
Yes, but not in Ukraine. You have to have the troops on the Ukraine borders to take options away from Russia convincing Belarus to invade like they aided in the first initial invasion 3 years ago. Belarus was directly involved. Why Ukraine is not bombing them is because Belarus has a bit of a revolution component where they want to overthrow the government just like Ukraine has and break ties with Russia to live in better living conditions than the poverty that they're in under Russia as a Russian satellite. Everybody looks to Poland, how strong the economy is in Poland, and wishes they could break free of the Russian ties just like Poland did. And it cost a lot of lives for Poland to be in that position. But their standard of living is very, very high compared to Ukraine and Belarus. And you can't blame people to want to live in better conditions.
Now let's look at Poland. Recently, they've announced that they're going to cut back on the assistance to the Ukrainians that are living in Poland,
Yeah.
and they're going to cut back on the assistance that they're giving to the Ukrainians, the military assistance. So it looks to me, anyways, that the people of Europe are starting to get tired of supporting this war, and
No,
Canada
Poland
now.
and Ukraine's had a conflict since the war started because Ukraine has farm produces that were going into Poland and lowering the price that Poland could get for their produce. They're both very large land-based countries and produce a lot of goods. And when the shipping ports were bombed by the Russians, Ukraine could only get rid of its goods going through Poland and other countries. And this caused a rift. And there's an underlying rift because of World War II and the involvements of Ukraine fighting for Russia against Poland and stuff. So there's underlying rifts, and that is the political conundrum of Poland and Ukraine. But I can guarantee you, if Russia takes over Ukraine and the hostilities Poland has towards Ukraine and Russia, there's going to be a high potential of Russia sending Ukrainian forces into Poland. And that's one of the threats of letting Putin get away with the invasion. So there's more to it than just meets the eye. We have to plan ahead, and I think people are missing the ball that war is not something that's nice. And by turning a blind eye and not getting involved, you're just allowing it to get bigger and fester. That we shouldn't allow. As Canada and Ukrainian heritage here represents almost 4% of the population, we should be directly involved. Like City Edmonton is 10% Ukraine. And that means that their relatives and friends are being killed over in Ukraine. So we do have an obligation on a world stage, as Canada can do, and Canada should be sending peacekeepers along these neutral borders in a prelude to forcing peace. If you act, you force peace. If you don't act, the war is going on forever and ever, because Russia has only one thing in mind. They're taking Ukraine because they want the land and the resources. That's it. And if Trump already has the resources, he's already probably got to deal with Putin. I get the resources whether you win or Ukrainian wins. So there's no losing on the Trump model. So he's not going to get directly involved, and he's going to hamper as much as he can Ukraine's ability to defend themselves. And I believe the only reason he's capitulating, offering to sell arms to Ukraine, is Ukraine's manufacturing its own arms and will be, 75% sufficient in 6 months or less on production. I mean, they're already using 90% of drones produced by themselves on the front line. They have long-range missiles now that can fly 300 kilometers or 3,000 kilometers. And they're big warheads. They've already got them in manufacturing, and they're being able to produce anywhere from 1 to 7 a month. And in a few months, 6 months, they'll have a stockpile of them, and they will start releasing them on Russian targets. Probably the Crimea Bridge will be blown up.
So Corey, assuming that everything that you're saying is correct, why do they need money from Canada?
Costs money to build these high-tech weapons. And
but the money's going to America to buy American ones, from what I read.
Yes, but they still need to replace munitions, and they still need to upgrade their forces because they're continually being destroyed. They're losing half of what the Russians are for equipment, but they're still losing them. So they need replacement. But until Germany, England, France start increasing their own manufacturing war economies, which they are, then they have to buy them somewhere, and the U.S. is where they have to buy them, and Trump knows that. That's why the extortion. That's why the sanctions and the threats and the you can't use the weapons. I'll tell you when you're getting the weapons. You can pay for them now. You might get them 6 months, 2 years later. And it sure looks like Putin pulls the strings of Trump. But both Trump and Putin benefit from the war economy personally. And when when your money is coming from the war economy, you sure don't want peace. So that's a myth. They don't, neither Trump nor Putin are really pushing for peace, or they would be doing a lot more. The US would be sending in a no-fly zone restriction. They would be sending longer range missiles saying, go ahead, bomb the supply trains bringing equipment to the front lines. They would say, go blow up the munitions manufacturing facility in Russia. They're not doing that. And that's your first telltale sign that corruption is afoot and it's a war economy and people are lining their pockets. And of course, Trump wants as much European dollars going his way because that's the way it's going to be. And it prevents, when the money's going to the US for these weapons, it slows down the manufacturing abilities of other countries to build their own war economies. Not a good scenario, folks.
Don't you think the $2 billion would be better spent on healthcare in Canada?
Well, of course, but are you going to turn a blind eye to war crimes? You're the guy that spouts the war crimes need to be enacted in Gaza. I mean, I'm for sending military over to Gaza from Canada and the countries of the willing to stop war crimes. I might be one of the few people that say acting is better than sitting on the sideline watching innocent people be slaughtered in a genocide movement. If we lose our troops, well, our troops can try to defend themselves, but innocent people cannot try to defend themselves. And we need to be a little more understanding that bullies will never bow down unless you stand your ground. And we're not standing our ground. We're letting them do whatever they want, emboldening them and empowering them. And lo and behold, they're getting very wealthy and rich off us turning a blind eye and sitting on the sideline.
What if, for argument's sake, we flip this on the other side and look at it from the Russian perspective, where NATO has been encroaching on Russia now for the last 25 years, when there was an agreement in place that they would not expand?
When countries leave the Russian sphere, the agreements change. Once USSR disbanded, Russia tried to be a democratic country. And there was no, we were including them in the G8, you know, and now it's back to a G7 because they did not want to join the world economy of democracy. And that's a shame because they had potential to be a strong economy. Instead, they chose to keep their people impoverished while the oligarchs enriched themselves. Now,
if I can give you another example, would the U.S. tolerate peacekeepers from, say, Russia or China in Mexico or Canada, for that matter?
it's a sovereign country. If they want to bring them in, bring them in. And if you don't like it, bomb the out of them. I mean, you're not going to have rational thought with dictators and fascists. So if Ukraine wants to bring in peacekeeping forces, that's up to Ukraine. That's their sovereign state. If they're told that you are not engaging in frontline operations and you're only keeping the border from being breached or looking after the civilians from getting murdered by the opposing enemy, that's the conditions of being there. And if the opposing side wants to target those troops, well, be prepared that if you target these peacekeepers, they're no longer a peacekeeping force. They're additional force to the army that you're opposing. So that's sitting on the sideline with an active and proactive stance so that you can tell the opposing side, look, if you want to make the war bigger, we're more than willing to stand up to you, but we're not sitting idly by allowing you to do whatever the hell you want. And if the U.S. was in that position where Mexico wanted to have troops of other nationalities there, Canada would probably be there too if the U.S. tried to invade Mexico. So you're talking hypothetical and not realistic views. What are you going to do when Trump invades Venezuela? He's already moving troops over to Colombia, like you had stated, and Venezuela is moving troops over to the Colombia border. claiming that it's all for a drug war. What you gonna do when they come for you? You're just gonna hope everybody turns a blind eye and they get you? Sitting idle and hoping and praying that some logic will come to pass and there will be a peace process. No, there's no peace process as long as you're having to fight to defend yourself from an aggressor. It's the aggressor that has to want peace, and the aggressor is only going to want peace when you make sure that he knows he's being hurt, that he can't get his objectives. Right now, Putin believes with the aid of Trump, he can take over Ukraine, period. And that's the problem. So we need to take a proactive stance. If France, England, and Canada all sent peacekeepers over along the border of Belarus and Poland in there, it would reduce the tensions between Poland and Ukraine. It would reduce the tensions between Ukraine and Belarus. It would help calm the tensions between Belarus and Poland. And it would increase the tension for Russia. Russia would have to go, well, do we want to drag these countries into the war? And then they have to make some real decisions. And Putin knows that if you drag other countries into the war, you're going to have some real issues because they can't even handle Ukraine. Ukraine's doing a fine job. Nobody was giving them supplies and backing them when in the 3-day incursion, and it failed. And Ukraine has said showed that they can hold their own.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying escalate.
It's not an escalation if it's done right. It's a strategic chess move that moves the players into position where they can actually help cause and force peace without direct involvement. And that means moving the troops on the ground at the borders as a peacekeeping operation sanctioned by the countries of the willing. And that clearly sends a message to Putin. And Putin will, his response will be, you better not send those peacekeepers in, or that's a declaration of war. And it is not a declaration of war. It's a declaration we're moving our peacekeepers in anticipation of the peace that you say you want. And now you got the choices on Putin. Does he want World War III? Or does he want peace? And that's, make no mistake, Putin, when you show up with more people on the table and more countries on the table, he has no choice but to decide, do I want full-out war? Are my allies going to join me? Or do I have to look at the peace solution? And I tell you right now, he's going to have to look at the peace solution because it's forcing his hand towards peace, which he claims he wants, but he does not act that direction. And he does not want to bring, definitely does not want to bring France into the fray. Because
How many troops is France going to?
It doesn't matter. It's a technology and the skill of the French Foreign Legion that he doesn't want on the front lines. He's having a hard enough time with the Ukraine army. He definitely wouldn't want a battalion of French on the front line. No, he wouldn't stand a hope in hell. And, you know, UK doesn't have much of an army, but they can provide support, I'm sure. And Canada is a support policing ability of peacekeeping, which would help. But the French are the key to it right now. And Russia has dealt them some blows in other parts of the world. And I'm sure the French would love to support Ukraine. And it would benefit them in the long run because Ukraine is, when the war is over, is going to be one of the top economies. And that would help the French economy by having France move in and do a lot of work towards building a peace in Ukraine. So that's my take on it. But I was bullied as a kid, and I know that bullies only know a show of force before they'll back down. You, on the other hand, were never bullied on anything. So you see peace as just negotiations and talk. Well, that's fine, but the real world says a bully will never back down. He's doing it for a reason, and the only way to stop a bully is to show him that he hit a brick wall and he's going nowhere. See that wall behind me? That's what Putin needs to see. A brick wall that he can't get through, And that's the only thing he's going to see. So he'll want peace. That means involvement. That means people
Corey-
on the ground in
Corey,
Ukraine.
I got to run. My machine's blowing up.
Okay.
Talk to you.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.